Here's what's coming up on episode 89 of the Big Seance podcast. Shannon Taggart.
Not a lot of people know anything about the history of spiritualism, which is incredibly fascinating. I mean, it ties to the women's rights movement, scientific inquiry, it affects modern art. There's all these just amazing cultural connections between spiritualism. And then there's this whole forgotten spiritualist history of photography that I've studied and been inspired by and totally blew me away. And it became an inspiration to me. I've kind of been observing this whole subculture within spiritualism and how they exchange information. They have their own material culture, their own types of ritual objects. So I started to see that, wow, I really have this kind of catalog about these practices that no one else has. And it's important information for history, too. And so I get into the seance. I'm sitting in the front row. I'm about 6 feet away from him, and it's red light, and I have my camera out. And his wife said, okay, now Gordon's going to work with the ectoplasm, and the spirits are going to change the shape of his hand. And I screamed, which is really, like, you're not supposed to do that in seances. So that she's sitting for transfiguration. So those are 3 images I took of her face in the same session, but they looked so totally, completely different.
Totally different.
Yeah.
That is so fascinating. Welcome to the Big Seance podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the seance. You are such a para-nerd for showing up here every other week for each and every new episode, and I appreciate it. A while back, one of you shared an interesting project with me, and since it was perfect for the Big Seance Parlor on Facebook, I dropped it in there for all para-nerds to see. This project is a book of photography compiled by an accomplished photographer and journalist, and it captures spiritualism through 16 years of research. Her name is Shannon Taggart, and I was lucky enough to connect with her to get the scoop. Is there not a more perfect guest or topic for this show? If you're not driving, or if you're in front of a computer right now, you'll want to find the show notes for this episode in your app, or just visit BigSeance.com, go to episode 89, that's this episode, and click on the link for her project, which is called Seance, Spiritualist Ritual and the Search for Ectoplasm. And you're going to want to see some of her photos while listening to our conversation. And once again, after the interview, we'll hear from Tim Prossel with a brand new Spectral edition. Some tea for you. Sitting here with me in my pretend big seance parlor is a woman who's been in many real seance parlors. Her name is Shannon Taggart, and I'm totally pumped to talk to her. And you're going to learn why here in a few minutes. She's a photographer and an independent researcher based in Brooklyn, New York. Her photographs have been exhibited and featured internationally, including within the publications Time, New York Times Magazine, Discover, and Newsweek. Her work has been recognized by Nikon, Magnum Photos, and the Inga Marath Foundation, American Photography, the International Photography Awards, and the Alexia Foundation for World Peace. From 2014 to 2016, she was scholar and artist in residence at the Morbid Anatomy Museum in New York. Shannon lectures internationally on her work. For the last 16 years, she's been on this quest to document modern spiritualism and its fascinating history. And she really, really wanted to photograph ectoplasm, which, believe it or not, we haven't talked much about on this show. She spent a lot of time at the beautiful and historic Lilydale, a spiritualist community that I've always found interesting and have wanted to visit, but haven't. And I wanted to also add that in addition to Lilydale, her work has taken her to places like France, Spain, and the Arthur Findlay College in England. Shannon is getting ready to publish a book, which I want her to tell us about a little later, or whenever it comes up, actually, but I've pre-ordered it, and after this interview, you'll probably want to do that as well. You can visit her site by going to shannontaggart.com, and that'll be in the show notes for you later whenever you visit it. Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you. I usually offer, as you know, coffee or tea in my parlor, but in real seance parlors, I'm willing to bet that there's typically a rule against that.
Yeah, not usually inside, but after, there's often tea.
After. Okay, I bet that's really fun. I hear your interest in this paranerd stuff began when you were a teacher. When you were a teenager. What happened then?
Yeah, so I grew up in Buffalo, New York, which is an hour south of where Lilydale, New York is, which is a small hamlet, the world's largest spiritualist community. And, you know, when I was 16, my cousin went to Lilydale for a reading, she went to a message service, actually, which is, they have these spots in the woods. Lilydale's a really beautiful place with this virgin wood forests, and mediums have been giving messages in these woods since 1879. And my cousin went to a message service actually in Lilydale, and this is a situation where you go and sit on a bench. There could be 200 people there. This is
Inspiration Stump, right?
Inspiration Stump, but there's another one called Forest Temple on the grounds too. But she was at Inspiration Stump, and the mediums, you know, there might be like between 5 and 10 mediums come up and they just point to people in the crowd and give them short messages. And my cousin received a message from my grandfather describing details about how he really died. And it wasn't the story that she knew. So she went home and found out that it was true. It revealed this kind of strange secret about my grandfather's death that nobody ever talked about. And so when I heard this story, and I remember my whole family being really kind of taken aback, and it felt very real and very, wow, what happened? I just became so curious, like, how could a total stranger know something like that? I mean, she didn't know my cousin's name. It's not like you could do, you know, it was like an anonymous situation. This is something that happened, I don't know, maybe 30 years before. So that just always stuck with me. And then I became a photojournalist, and I graduated from college and I was working as a photographer, and I was doing a lot of like public relations photography and straightforward journalism. And I wanted to find a project that really let me be creative, or that I could sink a lot of personal energy into. And I thought, oh, wow, I should go to Lilydale and just see what's there and kind of explore with my camera. And I thought it would be I thought it's been one summer making this short project about a quirky little town. And here I am 16 years later, finally putting it all together.
And you went in 2001 to Lilydale first.
Yes.
After that, can you tell us what you envisioned it to be in your mind, and then what you actually found when you got there?
I guess I didn't really have a vision of what it would be like. I was so nervous to actually even go into the gates. And I think the first time I ever went there, I just drove around and I didn't even stop or meet anybody. And it was off season because Lilydale is like a summer camp, kind of operates as like a summer camp. So it's really alive during the summer and it's very quiet in the off season. And what totally took me in when I first got there was that I really felt like I was in another era. There's something about Lilydale that they've been able to keep something of the Victorian era alive there. It's a very analog town, even to this day. It's kind of feels like, wow, you really are not in modern times. It's just got a very strange sense of place. And supposedly, too, it was a special place for the Native Americans, the area, the land where Lilydale is built on. And it's on a lake. It's a really beautiful, like I said, there's virgin wood forests, and there's all these tiny Victorian era cottages, and a lot of the buildings and homes are still the original architecture. So it was just I don't know. I mean, I had never been, it's such a unique space that I thought, I really have to come here and do a project now, because the first time I went there, I just said, I'm just going to go and see. And I was just completely taken aback by how different it was.
An analog kind of town. I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Like what I mean is, they still have handwritten notes everywhere. They still use typewriters for certain things. Yeah. And it's very charming. That element is very charming. There's a sign that hangs in the main hotel that says, please no seances in the foyer of the hotel. It's very special.
I know from reading Christine Wicker's book on Lilydale that if you're coming for the purpose of research or skepticism, I think she said something about having to cautiously kind of work your way in and get them to feel comfortable with you. Did you find that to be true when you first started your research there?
No, I had a different experience. I've talked to a lot of people who've tried to do projects there, and I don't know. I mean, I'm a local person, so that may have helped, but immediately everybody really welcomed me. And I think it was because they knew I was just so curious and so interested and so overwhelmed. And, I think that had a lot to do with it too. I also wasn't coming with any agenda. I came with a completely open mind, and I wasn't, so I came and I just said, I want to do this project, but I don't know what it will be. And I wasn't, a lot of times people present like, I'm going to do this book and it's going to be this. And maybe that has something to do with that. I don't know. But I was kind of just really more open-ended about it. So that may have affected it.
Yeah, and I guess it makes sense to me. You can see how they would sometimes feel like they need to kind of protect their little, their energy around them and the community, because it's not, there's nothing else like it.
Right. And I absolutely respect them for doing that. And I think that's why Lilydale has maintained this special aura, is because they are really careful. And there is a lot of misinformation there about spiritualism. And I think they're very careful about being portrayed as like devil worshippers or lunatics, or, I mean, the stuff that's out there about spiritualism is, there is a lot of misinformation. So I really understand why they are cautious.
The thing that fascinates me most probably about spiritualism is the drama or the theater of it. And that's exactly what your photography has captured. How do you describe your photography in this project?
Oh, well, thank you. I kind of, now at this point, I see the project as part ethnographic study, part journalistic, and then part my own experimental art project. And why I say ethnographic study is because I realized that I'm literally, as far as I know, I'm the only professional photographer documenting modern or contemporary spiritualism. And there's this whole, I've been working a lot lately with the physical mediums and the people who are working with the Victorian era traditions like ectoplasm and, seance rooms with cabinets and transfiguration type seances. And there's nobody studying them. I mean, there are some anthropologists, but a lot of them are not, they're not taking pictures or, sitting in, or I've kind of been observing this whole subculture within spiritualism and how they exchange information. They have their own material culture, their own types of ritual objects. So I started to see that, wow, I really have this kind of catalog about these practices that no one else has. And it's important information for history too. And I take that part very seriously. So I try to be as careful and as accurate about passing on that information as possible too. But then I have my own artistic practice that informs the work too. So it's kind of a very ambiguous project, I guess.
Yeah, and your photography it's amazing. And when you look, and by the way, people can see her photography by going to the link where you can pre-order the book, and she gives you a little sneak peek at the project in the book. And there's so much mystery in the photos, and there's some also just photos around the community of Lilydale and of the people. But then there's also the seance photos, and some of the photos, it's so interesting to me, look very similar to, historic photos that we remember from, not remember, I don't remember it, but look back, in the early days of spiritualism. And you've said that in your photography, you often cross a boundary that is typically a no-no in the field. What's that?
Yeah, I began to play with a photographic anomaly, which, as a professional photographer, when you're doing a commercial job or, some type of straightforward work, you really don't want any anomalies, meaning you don't want non-image forming light. You don't want unpredictable elements coming into the frame. You don't want light leaks or motion blurs or anything like that, because you're trying to describe and you're trying to control the process. And I began embracing accident and error and trying to push for these anomalies or accidents or mishaps, because I was finding that there was this beautiful synchronicity that was happening when I was photographing things that were invisible, meaning a medium in contact with spirits. You can't see that with your eyes. How do you photograph that? Like, I became very frustrated because I was making these pictures. When I was doing straightforward work in those situations, I was making pictures that really were not being true to the psychological reality of these events. And I just started to have some strange accidents with my camera. And then I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go for this and kind of go over that line between what is cheesy or tricky or bad photography and try to kind of see how far I could push that to get to some true meaning. So kind of ride that line. And that is the space that I found to be the most interesting. So that's what I mean by that when I cross the boundary.
And one thing that I've always wondered about, a lot of the seance photos are in that red light, or like more like a blue light, I guess. And is that something that is picked up just in the camera? Is that something that they incorporate into the seance themselves? Or is that something that you've done to capture something that was in the dark? So
in physical mediumship seances, because there's a lot of different types of seances, mm-hmm. or circles, or they could be called circles or sittings. But in physical mediumship, if there's any light, it's usually a dim red light. And it's kind of interesting because, the dark room goes on a dim red light, and then you have these like trance states developing under a dim red light. So I really like to notice that analogy. So I am put in these red light situations constantly. And the ones that are blue, that are monochrome blue, are situations where it was just easier to read the picture in blue rather than red. So I made it blue because I have so many pictures of red and black. I mean, it's like ad nauseum. And some of them, red and black, they're very close to each other on the, sensitivity spectrum. Even when you print red and black, it kind of like, it's very hard to print because the inks kind of blend together. So there are some where there was detail I could see, but the red was just killing it. So I would put those into blue. It's something I've been experimenting with. And I figured, well, it's monochrome still, so I'm not doing too much, because I don't do very much manipulation at all, but I have put some of the reds into blues just for the sake of detail. But yeah, there are some mediums who sit under a green light. I've been under green lights before, but it's usually 95% of the time it's red light. Yeah.
And you're a journalist, really. And so you also document things, other than photography, as well as you're going or after things are done. So you're like documenting things like in written form?
Yeah. I mean, Yes, I have. And the book will contain a lot of, I'm going to do a lot of interviews. I mean, and I have so far, but there's still a lot to do where I really want the voice of the mediums to come in to the work. Because one thing I find kind of frustrating is when you see the red and black images, for some, they're really frightening or they're kind of, dark or Halloweenish, or they kind of have like a dark connotation. But spiritualism and the seances that I'm in, it's not really a dark tone at all.
Right.
It's very spiritual and actually very positive and very much focused on healing and life after death being a positive thing. And so that's one thing with my writing and research and interviewing, the journalistic aspect is very important because I need to counter the way that the images kind of feel because they're so dark, dark in tone, in color and that. So yeah, that part is really important.
It's so interesting that you say that because I find that I'm always kind of explaining that to people who ask me questions about why I'm into the paranormal, people who aren't really in this circle, and well, that's so dark and scary. And I'm like, well, I don't see it as that. I almost never get scared. I think it's cool. But at the same time, one of the things I wanted to ask you after looking at your photography was if you had any frightening moments that went a little too far for your comfort. And I'm familiar with spiritualism, and I know that it's usually a very comforting thing. But after looking at some of your photos, I guess that was a question that I felt compelled to write down. Did you have any frightening moments or moments that were just a little too far for you?
I have to be honest, yes, but those were not ever in seance situations. It would be more, I like to use the term paradrama. Situations where they would be more interpersonal after the fact, where, sometimes I photograph mediums and they really just don't like each other. And, those kind of, or I've been in situations where there was a ton of drama that made me incredibly uncomfortable. And that doesn't happen all the time, but it is an element that exists. And I think it exists in all paranormal and like ghost hunting groups. I mean, I don't know. Have you ever come across the paradrama thing? I don't know if you have in studying the paranormal.
I have certainly heard about it from others. When I was involved in paranormal investigation, honestly, I'm a person who kind of likes to stay in my own little bubble. So I didn't jump out there and mix too much with other groups but I mean, you hear about that all the time. So I'm willing to bet that there are people listening to this who would relate to what you just said.
Yeah. So it's I don't know if it's scary, but it can be. And then sometimes it's really difficult to navigate. And I try to not, it's just something that is there and exists. And something, I don't know if you've ever heard of the book, The Trickster and the Paranormal. But it's one of my favorite books, and it's by a researcher, parapsychologist named George Hansen. And he's actually a friend of mine and kind of a mentor too. And he writes a lot about that. And his book actually helped me kind of comprehend and understand those aspects. So I suggest if anybody's interested in the topic of paradrama, you pick up a copy of The Trickster and the Paranormal.
Totally making note of that.
Yeah, it's good. It's a good read.
So you didn't just sit in the background for these experiences. You really immersed yourself in it, didn't you?
Yes.
Including, you say you attended psychic college there.
Yeah, actually, it's probably not made super clear in my artist statement, but by psychic college, I meant the Arthur Findlay College in England. It's actually near Stansted Airport, but I was brought there through one friend who was a Lilydale medium. And it was at Lilydale where I found out, there's a psychic college. It's kind of literally like a Hogwarts for adult spiritualists. It's a very unique, interesting, amazing place. And I went there for the first time in 2003. And I think I've been there 5 times now. And it's really an amazing place. It's a huge property that there was a spiritualist named Arthur Findlay who also wrote many spiritualist books. he was a lawyer. He owned this property, and when he died, he gave it to the Spiritualist National Union, and it operates as a college. And so all year long, every week, there'll be like 3 courses a week. You could take trance or spirit art or dream research or physical mediumship, or they have like a week for Italian students, a week for students from Sweden. I mean, it's really amazing. They have a website, arthurfinleycollege.org, I think it is. But I just couldn't believe that this place existed in the world. And I was just so happy it did, because it was such a unique place. And I learned a lot there too, as well.
I know a lot of people listening are going to be incredibly jealous that you went to Arthur Findlay.
It's a great place. Everybody should go if you want to go, if you're interested.
And is that what led you to travel to other international places as well?
What ended up leading me to the international was the practice of physical mediumship, because I found that a lot of it was happening in England and Europe. And I'm not sure why. You know, spiritualism is an American-born religion, but it's much more alive or relevant in England and places in Europe than it is here in the United States. So that was really why it was kind of the ectoplasm search that took me for the travels. But that's what I've been focusing on lately, was the ectoplasm.
Is Kai Mugi where you found the ectoplasm?
Yes, he was the first medium that I photographed. I've photographed 2 mediums who use ectoplasm. I mean, ectoplasm, though, it's an interesting term for spiritualists, because it doesn't just mean, you know, the white literal ectoplasm that you see with your eyes that you know from the vintage images or from Ghostbusters. Or,
right.
It can mean an energy that is in the room that is creating temperature changes or sensory perceptions, or, you know, that it's a sort of like spiritual type of energy. It can act like that too. So the term, so when I meet a medium and they say they use ectoplasm, I really don't know what they're telling me until I sit with them. They could mean literal ectoplasm. They could mean, you know, like a sensory perception, or it's transfiguration, which is like red light. When you sit under red light and you watch a medium try to morph their bodies, or it's a very hypnotic experience. It's more of like very low light, and the medium will sit there and all of a sudden your eyes will just see changes in the face. Now a neuroscientist who I've actually asked, I have asked one, you know, would say that's just your brain creating, you know, it doesn't have enough information to see what's going on because it's such low light and it's red and black, that your brain is just completing these images. And so that's why you're seeing changes. A spiritualist would say, no, that's ectoplasmic energy that is showing you that the physical and the spiritual can overlap, and it would be due to ectoplasm. So, you know, it's all, ectoplasm is a whole, I guess, rabbit hole, or it's a whole thing unto itself, but a very interesting one.
Well, and I want to make sure people know that when you talk about this project and your experiences, it's a 16-year wealth of experience that you had with it. And what I want to know is how many times, especially with the ectoplasm, did you, and I know you probably were open to it, how many times were you skeptical of the ectoplasm or what you were seeing, or came away with questions about it?
It's funny because myself personally, the goal of physical mediumship, if you're going by a textbook definition, should be a physical effect that everybody in the room objectively sees the same thing. Mm-hmm. But those effects are the ones that I'm much more skeptical about, rather than the ones where you're in a room and you had your own experience and you don't know how it happened. Or like you had one that was similar but different to the person next to you. Those I find I'm less skeptical about. And I don't, you know, I mean, that's just me. I mean, there's so much debate too about physical mediumship, and there are still scientific minded people studying it and debating about it. And still to this day, I mean, Kai Mugi, the German medium, is a very controversial figure. And there's a lot of fighting about what is actually happening with Kai. And I guess my perspective is I'm documenting this because it's history, and I'm actually asking the viewer to interpret it. So when I present my photographs, it's very much an invitation for the viewer to have their own experience and to read the images themselves, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. I've said just recently, actually, in a few episodes, I started enjoying the paranormal more when I kind of let go of the insistence to prove everything or find out whether something was true or not, and just experience it and talk to people and be there and see and hear it all. And, you know, I've often said the same thing. I'm just here to present it, and then, you know, whatever.
Yes, I agree. And I think Jeffrey Kripal, the religious scholar who writes about the paranormal, he just did a book with Whitley Strieber called The Supernatural. He has this, you know, he always describes the paranormal as subjective and objective overlapping. So once I understood, you know, and I mean, I came into it with a very, you know, either or approach when I began, and then I took a break, and then I came to the place where you're at, which is like, it's much more interesting if you don't try to make it either or, and you just kind of engage and go into the experience. And so now I see it, as he describes, Jeffrey Kripal, both and, you know, it can be, you know, there could be a lot going on. And if there's an interior experiential element to the paranormal, I'm never going to be able to observe that in other people. I can only have it in my own experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, right. How did your thoughts and feelings about, you know, spiritualism and mediumship and all of that grow and change over the 16 years? And you've probably hinted on a little bit about this already.
Well, yeah. So I guess I was working on the project for about 5 years, and then I just got really frustrated. It was before I had some happy accidents, and it kind of played with photography, but I kind of felt like I wasn't really saying anything important about spiritualism. I felt like when I took the break from the project, I felt like spiritualism was an impossible thing to try to approach with photography. And I left. I didn't do hardly any work for 4 years, but I couldn't stop thinking about spiritualism and kind of all the experience that I had had, and trying to process it, and kind of thinking about what did I miss, or why couldn't I get there with the pictures. And so I started to read a lot, and I read several books that really changed my focus, one of which was The Trickster and the Paranormal by George Hansen. Another one is called The Death and Resurrection Show by Rogan Taylor, which is really hard to find, and it's unfortunate because it's a great book. But those books helped me to embrace the ambiguity and the performative, and it can be this and that, or it can be the artistic in combination with the spiritual. And it just really opened my mind to the ambiguity. Instead of trying to cleanse out, you know, the mystery, I decided to take the opposite approach and dive into the mystery full force and kind of amplify it and just create more questions rather than trying to answer anything. And that's been the most interesting place, I think, for me to be.
When did you realize that you would end up doing a book?
I think so. When I started going back and photographing, and then I met a lot of people. Do you know a lot about the instrumental transcommunication?
Yeah. Several years ago, I was really into EVP and spirit boxes and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, when I decided to go back and start photographing again, I got really inspired by the ITC practitioners that I met, because they were using technology in such a fun, playful way, and, you know, using and misusing, or, you know, using it in a proper way, using it in an improper way, like almost like technology scrying. Mm-hmm. And I became like really inspired by that. And that whole ITC element came into my own work, and I started, you know, trying to do my own kind of ITC with my images, and then meeting the physical mediums and being inspired by even if you don't believe in physical mediumship, I know so many people who are interested in them just because they are really outsider performance artists, you know, even if you don't believe there's anything to be found there that's paranormal or metaphysical, they are, they're using music and sound and light and doing these body performances. And I started to embrace that and try to like document as much of that too, as well as the spiritual elements.
There's so many interesting things in ITC that are out there that, I felt overwhelmed there for a while when I was trying to just consume everything about spirit communication, and I wanted to learn it all and try it all. But things like, photographing into water and picking up faces, and I always wanted to try, I forget what they call it, like a video loop thing,
yes.
Where that sounds so fascinating. And I'm totally not techie enough to even figure out how to do that. But you could lose speaking of rabbit hole, you could, lose yourself in trying to follow all that. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I actually too, I have a water scrying picture I should send to you that I forgot to send, but yeah. And I've learned a lot from that whole aspect. And honestly, it's really, really creative and exciting just from an artistic standpoint, not even trying to create evidence. So I think when you get kind of strapped in or held back when you try to create evidence. And I also too, I have the luxury because I'm working as an artist. I'm not a scientist. So, I might be angering people who come from a scientific kind of angle, but I think there's more there to when you're at play, when there's a playful element and you're bringing creativity into it as well. There's more meaning, or, that's why I always call it synchronicities, because I can't really say it's evidence, but there's very strong synchronicities that are compelling.
Well, I think we need the scientists, but I think some of us aren't meant to be them.
Yes.
And, we can just let go and enjoy.
Yeah. Yes. Well, how should I phrase this? I have had criticism both ways, where it's like, why are you doing this if you're not trying to create evidence? And then on the same thing, why are you doing this if you're not trying to, show how much this is just bullshit? And I've had a lot of people who are very dismissive from either end of that. And, I guess it's just something that is always going to be there, and I think there's room for a lot of different angles or voices or points of view.
Right.
I went to a photography school we studied the history of photography quite thoroughly, and intensively. And I never knew that there was this thing called spirit photography. It wasn't in any of the history books that I studied from. And it was actually the spiritualists who taught me, oh yeah, there's this whole other archive of images that people were trying to bring photography and spiritualism together and in order to prove that the spiritual realm existed. And, that has become like a huge resource to me, that whole archive. And it's kind of like a forgotten or written out piece. It's not considered, appropriate or it's considered like, this embarrassing moment, I guess, if you will, but I found it such an incredible resource. And now I understand it and see it as, obviously there was a lot of, people didn't understand really what photography was or what it could do. So these are records of people trying to play with it to see what it could give. And, it can bend the truth. And a lot of those images are manipulated. But at the same time, I also see them as an original iconography made, like a religious iconography made through photography. And I don't know of another religion that ever used photography. We have painting, and other religions use patterns or different kinds of mosaic, but spiritualism embraced photography and kind of ended up making this whole its own unique symbolism through photographs, like ectoplasm, or those images of the mediums. And what those images represent is their belief that the spiritual and the material can come together. So there's so much meaning. And I also see them as the spirit photographs as really intense visuals that talk about love and loss and human grief and what it's like to experience somebody leaving this realm and going to the next. And so I think that spirit photography is a really interesting thing to consider. And I hope to build off of that history with this book.
And it's so interesting to think about the fact that during this time period, especially early spiritualism, there were people who went a whole lifetime and only had a few photos ever taken of them. And in a day when we're taking, 20 photos a day and selfies and everything, photography wasn't something that everybody had access to. And so to see these would have just been truly mind blowing.
Yeah, no, it's a really, really interesting point. And there's all these crossovers between spiritualism and photography. Like they came around about the same time. And, where the first public seances were held, that was in Rochester, New York, literally down the street from where Kodak built its headquarters like 40 years later. Mm-hmm. So they were both like brought to the public or popularized in the same city, like almost the exact same, like a half a mile away from each other. And they were brought together in all these scientific attempts to use photography to prove that the spiritual realm existed. And this is at a time, too, where science was discovering a lot of invisible realms existed, like germ theory. And, there was disembodied communication with the telegraph and the telephone. And, people were seeing through or photographing through microscopes and telescopes, like the minute, tiny, and the vastness of the universe. So it was kind of a practical thing. Well, what else can we see with photography? We're seeing all these other invisible realms. Why can't we see the spiritual side or what exists in that realm?
So we've been describing the book a little bit already, but this is an audio format. And, we're talking about these detailed, mysterious, beautiful photos, but describe what the book is going to be and how people can pre-order it. And, then I also want to talk about some of the photos, but I want to make sure people know ahead of time kind of what this is. And we'll have, people can check out the show notes for the episode at bigseance.com for a link to catch it to.
Okay, great. So one of the reasons it took me so long to put this book together is because I didn't have a vision for how it should be. And that was because I realized that the images I was making required a lot of context, because not a lot of people know anything about the history of spiritualism, which is incredibly fascinating. I mean, it ties to the women's rights movement, scientific inquiry, it affects modern art. There's all these just amazing cultural connections between spiritualism. And then there's this whole forgotten spiritualist history of photography that I've studied and been inspired by, and totally blew me away. And it became an inspiration to me. And so my images, everything I'm making is kind of referencing this history. So if you don't have that presented with your work, it kind of detracts from the work. So my book there'll be an introduction. I have a foreword written by Eric Davis. He's the author of the media study cult classic Technosis, and he's an expert on where the religious imagination and technology kind of merge. And so he's going to write a piece, and then I'm going to write an illustrated introduction which will talk about the history, and we'll have historical images, and so you get a sense of where I'm coming from to kind of talk about some of the cultural cues of spiritualism, and then it'll be my images with extended captions that will also have interviews and pieces from the mediums themselves referring to what's happening in the pictures. So I think it's probably be about 350 pages, full color. And we've done some of the layouts. I think it's, a lot of large photographs. And the historical stuff I'm really excited about including. And I've been talking to some of the archivists who are in charge of those images, and it's looking really exciting. So.
Oh, when you said 350 pages, that just got me really excited right there.
I'm excited too. I can't wait.
That's a lot of photos. So speaking of the photos, I just kind of pulled some and threw them in my document here. And I want to make sure people know that you've got photos that people can look at on that site that we're talking about.
Yes.
But let's see if we can, are there any that you want to hit on first or point out?
Well, the ectoplasm images will be in the book, but one of the weirdest experiences I've had, during the entire time of photographing, there's actually two with a medium named Gordon Garforth. Mm-hmm. and he's a physical medium from England, and he works with his wife, Gaynor. She is his circle leader. And I met him at there was a Spiritualism and Science week at Arthur Findlay College, and he was a physical medium there. And he said to me, I use ectoplasm to change the shape of my hands. And this is before it was early on in my ectoplasm pursuit. And I thought to myself, I'm probably not going to see anything, because sometimes, I'll meet mediums and they'll say, you're going to see this, and I don't,
Right.
So I thought it's probably not going to happen. But he said, no, you're welcome to photograph it, and I welcome you into the sitting. And so I get into the seance. I'm sitting in the front row. I'm about 6 feet away from him, and it's red light. It's not that dim. It's not as dim as I've situations I've been in. And I had my camera out, and his wife said, okay, now Gordon's going to work with ectoplasm, and the spirits are going to change the shape of his hand. And he put out his hand, and he slowly moved it across his lap, and there was a light in front of him. And as he moved it, all of a sudden it just skipped into this gigantic form, and right in front of my eyes. And I screamed, which is really you're not supposed to do that. Seance is really unprofessional of me. And then everybody else started screaming too. So I couldn't tell if they were seeing what I was seeing, or they're just screaming because I screamed. And then he pulled it back, and it just went back. And he had a short sleeve shirt on, and it wasn't a prosthesis. It was the most elegant, magical thing I've ever seen with my eyes ever. And I was shocked by it. I was truly, truly shocked. And I was convinced that I would see the images on my camera, and that I would see a small hand, and that I had hypnotically rendered this large hand because they told me I was going to see a large hand,
Right.
and I was in such low light. But then when I looked at my pictures, there was this gigantic hand. And in the picture, it looks like a glove, or it looks like a fake hand in the picture, but that's not what it looked like with my eyes. I took those pictures to Lilydale, and my friend, the historian Ron Nagy's like, oh, Shannon, that's a glove. And I was like, no, but it really wasn't a glove. I'm telling you. And people, but that's what I love about the image, because people can read what they want into it. Oh, is it a gigantic hand? Is it this elegant magic trick? Is it like a hypnotic hallucination that through the action of the long shutter kind of mimicked each other? I love that all of those readings are in the photograph, and that's that's how I present it. Here it is, you decide.
And you sent me that photo. It's really interesting, and you could see how it could look like a glove, but it's also interesting. You've been talking about, comparing what your mind might see with what something digital captures, and trying to, equal those out. That it's interesting.
Yeah. So, Gordon's such a nice person, and just really has let me photograph him quite a bit. And I've just had such amazing experiences with him. And there's another picture I sent you. It's not on my site, but it will be in the book, where I was photographing him, and he was he was in trance. It was a green light. And he said, oh, ectoplasm will come over and change the shape of my face. And so he goes into trance, and he's speaking, and I'm photographing him. And a lot of the pictures, he looks drastically different. And of course, I'm doing a long exposure. So I understand that this is also a function of my shutter, that there's a blur and he's looking different. There was this one image where he had this really bizarre, he had no facial hair, and he had this, in this picture, he had this very bizarre Hitler-esque mustache. And I was actually afraid to show him this picture, because that's a pretty unflattering way to photograph somebody. And I don't know, it was just the way that the image is. He literally looks like he has this very short mustache. And so when I showed him the pictures, I did show him that one, and he said, oh, I love that picture. And I was confused by that. And then he took me to his home and showed me a picture of his great-grandfather, who had the exact same mustache.
Wow.
And so it was just this very eerie photographic synchronicity that I just found it really shocking. And I guess, to be totally shocked by your own photographs is a really exciting experience. And so that'll be in the book as a diptych. I think I'm going to see him in May and probably do a portrait just a regular portrait of him so you could see how different his regular face looks from this image.
Oh, that would be good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at one now that are 3 faces in a row in red light. Is that him too?
No, that's actually those are 3 faces of the same female medium. She's a friend of mine, very good friend of mine named Lauren Thibodeau. She's a Lilydale medium. So those are her, it's so that she's sitting for transfiguration. So those are 3 images I took of her face in the same session, but they looked so totally, completely different.
Totally different.
Yeah.
That is so fascinating.
Yeah.
And I think I remember reading about her too. She's one of the more famous ones there, isn't she?
Yeah, she's been a Lilydale medium for quite some time, and she's a great medium. She's in the Christine Wicker book too.
Oh, that's probably why the name stands out.
Yeah.
And so you've also got this photo of, it's in red, of I'm assuming a medium sitting in a chair, and there looks like a lightning bolt, is going into his solar plexus. And do you know which photo I'm talking about? That looks really interesting. What's going on there?
Yeah, that's a physical medium. His name is Kevin Lawrenson, and he ran a space called Mont Cabaral with his partner Tom Morris, and it's no longer there, but it was a center for physical mediumship, and literally almost every single physical medium, or many of them, would go to this it's a 12th century tobacco farm. It was like this huge property with like little villas, and they turned the entire top floor of the main building into a seance room. And so that's Kevin in trance, a long exposure.
Wow.
But I love that picture. It looks very electric.
It does.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Thanks.
This is totally random, but I'm looking at we talked about the analogness of Lilydale, and I don't know if it's a medium or not, but someone holding a spirit box. And I think it's cool to see. I never really imagined people at Lilydale chilling out with spirit boxes.
Oh yeah. That woman, Naomi, she's a healer, but yeah, that was from an experiment I was sitting on. I was sitting in on, I guess in the summer there are classes like on EVP or ITC, but it's not hugely popular in Lilydale, but that was from an English researcher came over named Donna Hogan Sinclair, and she was doing a presentation, and this was during her experiment.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh, there's so many nerdy things that I could think of to ask you, and oh my gosh, seance trumpets and all of these cool techniques and table tipping and
apports and
it just so many rabbit holes. So tell us where we can find you, if people can contact you, if you want to talk any more about the link, and again, it'll be in the show notes. And, if there's anything coming up for you and all of that, social media, any of that stuff?
Sure. So my website is shannontaggart.com, and I have I have a news section where I've been doing other interviews written, in press, and that'll all be posted there. And the book is available at unbound.com, and you'll have the link in the show notes. It's kind of long, so I won't say the whole thing. And you can pre-order the book, and there's also, there's some upsells, like you could order a bent utensil. My friend Lauren Thibodeau is bending some metal for me to send to people who, I think it's like $20 extra, and you get one of those. I'll send you. And then I'm also selling some prints. But if you just want the book, please order the book. And if you are interested and know other people who are interested too, I would hope you spread the word.
Well, you totally rock. There's no more perfect topic in person, I think, to talk to fit right into the big seance and spirit communication.
Thank you so much. I was really excited to be a guest on the big seance. I'm a big fan.
Yay, thank you. Wasn't that great? I wanted to leave you with 2 more details about Shannon. She apparently puts together a lecture series at Lilydale every summer with several speakers and some awesome paranerd topics. And for 2017, that program will be on Friday, July 28th. If you're interested in more information about that speaker series, contact me because I've got the schedule. And Shannon also wanted me to point out that anyone who orders the book through the pre-sale will be listed by name as a patron inside and in all future editions. Thank you, Shannon.
You're listening to the Big Seance Podcast with Patrick Keller. Look for us on iTunes and be sure to check out bigseance.com for more discussion.
Welcome to Spectral Edition. I'm Tim Prossel. In many of these old ghost reports that I've found, the ghost is an unknown entity. We don't know who the spirit was in life, if it was ever alive at all. But here's an article in which it seems we know who the ghost is. This was published on July 8th of 1878 in the Cincinnati Daily Star. The headline is, "An Old Man's Ghost, an Apparition That is Startling a Neighborhood." Ulster County seems to be a favored neighborhood for ghostly visitations and other things of a marvelous nature. The widespread excitement last winter regarding the Dunn dwelling, which for a long while was believed by many credulous persons to be haunted, has already been followed by another similar sensation. Unlike that of Old Man MacDonald, the prevailing ghost does not confine itself to a particular dwelling or spot, but haunts a whole neighborhood. The locality visited by this ghost is a thinly inhabited farming region, situated at the foot of Shawangunk Mountains in a remote part of the town of Rochester and called Logtown. In this neighborhood lives a family by the name of Rose, the head of which, Lewis Rose, died some months since. Old Man Rose, as his neighbors called him, was a remarkably eccentric character. A scoffer at the Christian religion and a blasphemer in no small degree, he despised all religious instruction up to the day of his death and entertained a contempt for ministers of the gospel which he could ill conceal. He repeatedly informed his family that he did not want a preacher to officiate at his funeral. He looked upon eternal punishment as the penalty of his disobedience and impiety with anything but fear. He was an illiterate old fellow, intellectually incapable of indulging in philosophical speculations on any subject, but there was one fear that constantly haunted Rose, and which, in spite of his fearless and stoical nature, he could not conquer, and that was a terror of being buried alive. About a year ago, Rose was seized with his last illness. On his deathbed, he raved and cursed, but became calm in his last moments, and called his wife to his bedside, and said, "Wife, I'm going to die. Satan is after me. I hear the rattling of his chains, but I will promise you if I can break away from him, I will come back." Still haunted with the fear of premature burial, he concluded with the request that his body be kept 8 days before being buried, and he desired to have it thrown out on the fields after that length of time to be eaten by the crows. This request his friends regarded to a certain extent, strange as it was, but having no means to preserve the body, decomposition set in almost immediately after death, and the turgid and discolored corpse, which emitted a stench that was scarcely possible to bear, was interred on the 5th day. The promise of Rose to come back if he could break the chains of Satan was known only to himself and family for a long while, and certainly nothing was more unlooked for than its fulfillment, for as much given to superstitious notions as the people of remote neighborhoods usually are, none doubted that Rose had been taken care of, and so not a thought was given the matter. But that he has come back is very generally believed in the community. His ghost first appeared, it seems, one night recently when it was met on the open highway by a member of the Independent Order of Oddfellows. The ghost, he affirms, was standing with his face toward him, not 10 feet away, and as there was bright moonlight at the time, he is positive that he could not have been laboring under a delusion. Besides, he had been acquainted with Rose for years, and the personal appearance of the deceased was such as to make his identity certain under almost any circumstances. He did not speak to the apparition because it vanished before he had an opportunity to do so. On a subsequent occasion, Rose appeared to another resident of the community, and, he avers, spoke to him. At another time, a lady living in an adjoining neighborhood asserts that the ghost of the departed was seen in her house, and she is willing to testify so under oath. Altogether, the apparition has been seen on 5 different occasions by as many different persons. Boy, Louis Rose. Now there's a character that I would have liked to have met. Probably wouldn't want to spend a lot of time with him, but maybe I could have had a beer with him. This is Tim Prossel, and you've been listening to the audio version of Spectral Edition. I have close to 300 of these ghost reports, all authentic articles published in U.S. newspapers between the years of 1865 and 1918. I post one each Wednesday on my website. The website is called The Merry Ghost Hunter. I hope you stop by.
Thanks for joining us for the Big Seance podcast. We'd better get back to the table while there's still some candlelight left.
So are you ready for another Paranerd hashtag? Jump on Twitter and tweet me at Big Seance with the hashtag Spiritualism Book. That's hashtag Spiritualism Book. And if you liked the episode, why not share it? Thanks for being here today. For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit bigseance.com. Just click on the Big Seance podcast logo or find it in the menu. You can also find and subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, TuneIn Radio, and iHeartRadio. Do you have any comments or feedback? Go to bigseance.com/feedback to learn how to get your voice in a future show. Or you can call my feedback line, 7755-TELL-ME. That's 775-583-5563. Interested in learning how to promote and share the podcast? Go to bigseance.com/share. Thank you so much for listening. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time.